We think this Earth is ours, that we're in the driver's seat. But the Earth is on a journey of its own. Did you know the tallest mountains on Earth once towered over Toronto? Or that from Wisconsin to Michigan, a tropical salt sea covered this continent? Or that concealed in the depths of the Great Lakes, the remains of a legendary waterfall lie buried? Higher than today's Niagara Falls. Join us on a journey to the world you thought you knew, as we explore the geology of the Great Lakes. Meet the stranger beneath your feet. Hear the birth stories of this planet we call home. From the moon, you can recognize their striking shape. 5 lakes spanning a staggering 94,000 square miles. They hold 1/5 of the world's fresh surface water and 90% of North America's. Niagara Falls, jewel in the Great Lakes crown, key to our knowledge of the Earth's journey. They've swept millions off their feet. But few know that Niagara Falls, flowing from Lake Erie to Lake Ontario and shared by Canada and the US, hold a profound geological significance for the world. To explore that significance, geology professor and rock detective Nick Isles has brought 2 of his students on a whirlwind survey.
So if you want to learn about the geology, this is probably the best way to do it. And then where we're coming into just now is the front of the Niagara Escarpment, right here. Yeah, so this was where Niagara Falls were 12,000 years ago.
Since then, the falls have crept steadily backwards, roughly 4 feet per year. In volume alone, it's the world's greatest waterfall, with a flow of more than 4.5 million gallons per minute. In its rush and tumble, the water bites away the soft clay rock of the base, leaving the hard top layer, or cap rock, unsupported.
And the water is flowing over that hard cap rock. The upper part of the cliff is actually eroding into those shales. And it's like a giant rock cutting machine. And this is all the debris that's produced. And it's in that way that the gorge is lengthening. So if we were to come back here another 10 or 20 years' time, that would be further to the south. It would have receded. Oh, this is a fantastic place to be. This is the birthplace of modern geology. There should be a plaque here in recognition of its importance, because this was the first place in the 19th century where there was an estimate of past time, a fairly precise estimate of how old the Earth was. And that was all based on Sir Charles Lyell, this eminent British geologist, coming here, recognizing that faults had been cut back. And he looked at the length of the gorge, which was a product of the recession, and said, hey, we've got about 36,000 years recorded here. And that was fundamental change, because most people believed the Earth was only a few thousand years old at the time. And then he also said that you look at the layers of the rocks in the sidewalls of the gorge, and you've got immense amounts of time. So this really threw a spanner in the works about how Victorians regarded the Earth, and opened up this quest for trying to discover how old the Earth really was. And so Lyell's simple observations at Niagara Falls set in motion a sort of long geologic journey to where we are today, after the discovery of uranium and radiometric age dating, where we know the Earth is very, very old indeed.
How old? 4.5 billion years, and always on the move. The Earth's tough outer layer consists of continental and oceanic crust. That crust is broken into roughly 20 plates, all interacting with each other. Beneath the crust lies the mantle, command center and engine room of the world. Moving to a relentless inner rhythm, plates lurch over the globe, merging into supercontinents and cracking apart, all in slow, slow time. Our story starts 1,300 million years ago with a supercontinent later named Rodinia. Here in Georgian Bay above Lake Huron, you can almost see how tectonics works. One continent edging near another, angling against it. A violent collision took place here at Rodinia's birth, causing the process of mountain building, in scientific terms an orogeny, to begin. Creating the giant Grenville Mountains, adding new land to the continent, and opening the first chapter in the history of the Great Lakes.
Is the size of the origin, the width of it also greater in the Grenville than it is in
Oh yeah, the Grenville's humongous.
So it must be bigger blocks.
Nick Culshaw, leading Grenville expert. Tom Crow, master rock dater. 3 geologists on a journey back to the Earth's turbulent childhood. These rocky roots are all that's left of those towering mountains.
They've got a very complex folded rocks. I mean, with all these measurements that we're doing, we seem to be getting some consistency,
That's
don't we?
right, that's right. We're looking at 65 there.
Okay, so we really should measure one over here too,
Yeah.
just be complete.
Yeah, we need one over there.
But
The Grenville orogeny presumably took place as a result of the collision of North America, Laurentia, which was a continent that already existed and had existed for the best part of 1 billion years before the collision took place. And probably some other continent riding on top of a chunk of oceanic crust.
it would have looked very similar to the Himalayan mountains, very high. Yeah, maybe 10 kilometers high, covered with snow, with glaciers draining away from the mountains, and big rivers carrying enormous volumes of sediment.
because the role of the rivers and the glaciers was ultimately to destroy the mountains, wipe them off the face of the earth. And in so doing, take the load off the crust, and it's like on a gigantic spring, so the crust slowly rises, it undergoes further erosion, and over millions of years, probably about 400 million years, the deep crustal roots of the mountains are exposed at surface.
But look at this grey layer over here. Obviously it forms a great big wide second fold. It's coming round like this, back on itself, follow right up to here, and what do we see? We see the hinge of a first fold. That's a refolded fold. And then within that layer...
It's not the vanished verticality that excites them, but the horizontal mysteries at their feet. Each sinuous shape holds a clue to how mountains are built, where one piece of continent came from, how it might have mated with another, and begun to flow.
What causes rocks to flow? Well, I guess you've got to have two things. You've got to have some sort of force or pressure acting in one direction, something that's pushing on them. But the rocks won't flow unless another condition is met. They have to be hot. And for every rock, there's a certain temperature at which all of a sudden they become soft, or at least they will flow over a very long period of time. And you know, we're talking about millions of years here. All crustal rocks have radioactive elements in them. So if you put one chunk of crust on top of another, that heat-producing layer is now buried below a great thickness of rock above it. And that thickness of rock sitting on top of the heat-producing layer acts as a blanket and keeps the heat in. Then the temperature goes up. Kind of that direction there. They flow, but they flow slow. Like that. That's the Shanaga shears.
And that flow reveals even more secrets, as we'll see next. Thousands of islands dot Georgian Bay, waiting like pieces of a stone jigsaw puzzle to be fitted together by geologists. And so clarify our picture of the immense forces which gave birth to the highest mountains on Earth.
Holy smokes, this is gorgeous.
Yeah,
look
really
at it.
Different.
Yeah.
Everything's thinner and stretched out more.
Yeah, look at this up here.
Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful tight folds. Look at those.
Right.
Gorgeous.
Right.
Things as thin as that. A lot of movement, I guess, right? A lot of stretching, a lot of change of shape. Wonderful stuff. It's absolutely spectacular. This is the Louvre of deep crustal geology, I would say.
The crust, normally buried under continents, can be from 25 to 60 miles thick.
Tom, this is a neat little place. It's a kind of small-scale model for what's going on.
To scientists, it's a gigantic research lab, a rare chance to study some of Earth's building blocks and their implications for today.
If you look around the world, there's very few places on Earth where you can actually see what makes the middle part of a very, very thick mountain belt, how it works, what's going on there. Here, we've got something that's Tibetan size, or Himalayan size and scale. It's 1,000 kilometers long, it's very wide, and we can see over miles and miles and miles the clues that teach us about what goes on in the deep parts of mountain belts. Mountain belts and the development of the continental crust in general isn't a trivial problem at all. It's something that's integral to life. In fact, it's integral to the very, very long-scale evolution of the atmosphere. If this stuff wasn't here, we'd have CO2 up there on the very long scale.
We see it starting here, we see it...
Tom Crow's been dating rocks for decades, but these vanished mountains still intrigue him.
Well, the Grenville to me has been an enigma, and it's been very hard to actually approach it. How do you understand something for which there are no primary features? All the rocks, and all you can say about them for sure is they were all hot. If you can't date them, you really can't put them into context. The Earth's history is more or less impossible.
But Tom kept practicing what he calls the black art of uranium-lead dating, pioneering techniques now prized globally for their accuracy.
Now we can measure the original age of the rock and the time of the melting. And in sedimentary rocks, our sample size is so small, we can take 1 grain at a time and date the mountains from which those sedimentary materials were derived. Those grains have typically a diameter like a hair in your head, and they weigh a few millionths of a gram. But we can do things now that we couldn't even dream about.
Over 1 billion years, and these stony roots remain. Stubborn, silent witnesses to the passing of giants. But still more change has to come before the Great Lakes emerge. Millions of years flow by. The Grenville Mountains continue to erode. A new supercontinent crashes together. Oceans come and go. New volcanic mountains rise, their weight shaping large sinks in the middle of North America. One of these will be the Michigan Basin. Over 400 million years ago, it was filled by a vast warm sea washing across the continent's interior.
If I was a time traveler coming in from outer space and landing in this old quarry, which at first sight is a very dull place, there's a mine of information about ancient environments that we can collect.
You know, I always think in looking at this, we should be wearing snorkel gear, because this is just the same as what you see down the Caribbean when you go down there on vacation. It's an ancient reef.
Just a massive coral.
It's just a massive coral, yeah, many different types. Solitary corals.
They look like cucumbers, which just would have been growing like little trumpets up from the seafloor. And then there's these other types. See these branching types? These are antler corals, just because they look like antlers on a deer. And they're also crinoids. These would have been sea lilies, stems growing up from the seafloor, like kelp on the modern-day seafloor. But none of it's in place. It's all been broken. So this is like a graveyard of broken coral, and this is how the reef builds up through time. There's a lot of evaporation, so down there would have been probably extensive salt deposits.
Slowly, this continent spun away from the equator, bearing those salt deposits with it. Deposits which were sprinkled all around the Michigan Basin and ended up buried in massive quantities right under our feet. The story of how this happened is up next. Today on the southeast shore of Lake Huron, a state-of-the-art mine at Goderich, Ontario, provides the modern world with age-old salt, a relic of when this region once lay at the hot equator.
We're going down about 1 meter a second, and we're going down an ultimate depth of about 500 meters below the ground surface. And at that stage, we'll be in very old rocks, We're basically in a time machine, going back down through successive layers, millions of years a second. By the time we're at the bottom of the shaft, we're being rocks that are at least 400 million years old, which date to a time period geologists call the Silurian.
An ordinary elevator becomes the entrance to the underworld and the sterile kingdom of salt.
Thanks, Peter. Thank you.
Nick, Timothy.
Good morning.
Mine Superintendent.
We're off to explore the salt mine.
Alrighty.
Suddenly, the vanished ancient sea looms everywhere, a powerful presence more than 1,700 feet underground. Brooding light, distorted shadows, and towering salt pillars evoke a mythical ruler whose portrait gleams from every wall.
So we're parallel with the coast.
Yep.
With Lake Huron.
Yep. Actually,
Right.
we're out under the lake.
Under the lake, about
3 or 4 miles.
Yeah, offshore.
Yeah.
Remarkable. Remarkable. Have you ever had any problems with the roof?
Oh, yes.
Really? And that's
since-
due to gas and water?
Well, since this mine's opened up, we've had ground control problems.
Can you predict when that will happen in some cases?
Yep. We have what we call guardian angels in the roof.
Uh-huh.
And when you start getting separations, a
Right.
couple inch separation up above into the
Right.
25 foot of salt, the guardian angels will trip and fall, and the guys see that and say, we got a problem in this
I
area.
see.
So we'll come in with a roof bolt or put
Right.
more bolts in. Or do
So you
something.
get a heads up when the roof falls?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So what would you call this mining technique that's being used here?
It's called room and pillar.
Right, so we're driving along a large room now.
That's exactly right. We're in the
Okay.
room, 60 foot wide, and we have pillars that are 60 foot high.
And these are holding the roof up.
Exactly.
Right, right.
That's why we leave them there.
Right.
Like a coded message, seasonal patterns over several hundred years can be read in the walls. Each white layer recording extreme heat, the dark layers indicating cooler, rainier weather.
This is a very interesting record of climate here because it's very unusual to get such a very fine scale resolution of almost yearly changes in climate. So this has a truly global significance.
Wars were once fought over salt. Ancient Rome often used it to pay its soldiers. And for many societies, it was a crucial preservative. But the richness of this primeval underground empire suggests it will last for millions of years to come, because its deposits stretch over 200,000 square miles, from Ontario to West Virginia to Michigan.
So where are we, EZ, below the city of Detroit?
Well, we just got off a number 2 shaft, which was sunk in 1925, and we're about 1,140 feet below the city right now.
And this must be the oldest.
But for
mine.
sheer atmosphere,
Yeah.
the Detroit Salt Company rivals any adventure story. A dark labyrinth of a mine with buried treasure at its heart.
Oh, wow. Core. Boxes and boxes of core. So these would be drilled well in advance of you mining, just so you know what you're going through and there's no problems that you encounter when you're drilling.
That's right. Exploration cores would be a reason to core.
Its manager is EZ Manos.
When they put the mine down, they put several core holes down into the earth,
Right.
just to even determine if this seam was a viable or economic seam to mine. In this first section of the core box, we have a limestone deposition mixed in with some of the red hematite or iron stained salt, and then you see it grade into salt, clear salt, beautiful salt. Look at that. I mean, that's purity easily in the 98% range.
It's a tremendous record.
Deep under suburban Detroit, a parallel city jogs along, a cobwebbed twilight city of secrets and shadows. Easy knows every inch of his quirky kingdom.
We've come into a really interesting part of the mine now. We've been going through miles and miles of flat layers, and all of a sudden we've got this disturbance. What do you think's gone on here?
Well, this is relatively rare in the mine to see, but we actually have...
Here, mud and sediment seem to have been swept through the reefs and into the basin by a sudden flood, contaminating the purity of the salt. While these stony ripples on the mine's roof clearly show that just above their heads once lapped an ancient shoreline.
So what do you think the shoreline is?
From looking at these ripples, I would deduce that the shoreline is somewhere behind us.
Just behind us?
Yeah.
Right up on the rim?
Pretty close. Yeah.
So we're walking down through the salt now, getting into the underlying layers.
Right.
So this is as the basin was before salt deposition. Yeah, that's a very, very sharp change.
It's kind of like detective work, where you take them rocks and try to put them together to tell a story. A geologic journey that helps us understand how we've got to even the point we are today and what we see today. The interesting question to ask is, do we really think Detroit will be here 10,000 years from now, or Toronto? You know, could we last 400 million years? I don't know.
Ice sheets have been around for billions of years, but their most recent rule in North America began over 2 million years ago. Then, like giant white invaders, glaciers stalked the land, plundering everything in their path, scouring out the Michigan Basin, and carving it into the shape we know today as the Great Lakes. In Toronto, the crumbling cliffs of the Scarborough Bluffs bear witness to how glaciers snatched up chunks of landscape and carried them off, releasing them far from home. These sediment layers provide an almost perfect record of North America's last ice age.
So we've just come down this really deep gully from the top, haven't we? And the cliffs are eroding at a huge rate. But the gullies are useful because it gives us a nice picture of these glacial sediments. And this is typical of what is called till by geologists. It's a very poorly sorted material, looks like a raisin cake texture. And if you go out to the Rockies, where the glaciers are receding today, you can find material exactly like this exposed where the ice is retreating, because this occurs at the ice bed, and the ice is grinding up the bedrock below, smearing it across the landscape. And if you look at the pebbles, you'll see they come from very different areas. There's limestone, shale, so they're fairly local, but then this guy here is a pink pebble from the Shield, way to the north. So the ice is sampling the bedrock, which is grinding away and bringing it into the area. See the big eroding cliff? See these slabs? I wouldn't want to be there in a big rainfall when those come off. You see the material that's fallen down.
The stern profile of the Niagara Escarpment, rim of that primeval salt sea, still dominates the landscape, encircling most of the Great Lakes. those coral reefs have turned to limestone, and time and glaciation have worn deep changes in its arresting features.
Yeah, this is a fantastic spot for studying the effects of glaciation on the landscape. Remember that about 12,000 years ago, there were several kilometers of ice above us. So we would have been entombed underneath great thicknesses of ice. And that ice melted back very quickly. The process started maybe about 14,000 years ago, and it was essentially over by 10,000 years ago. So you've got to melt all that ice. You produce enormous volumes of meltwater, and the meltwater wants to escape back to the Atlantic Ocean, east. And in spilling over the Niagara Escarpment has cut these great incisions that we see.
Other forces also dramatically changed the face of the Great Lakes as the glaciers departed, the rebounding of the Earth's crust from under their weight. And, as these scientists are about to discover, surprising climate changes revealed in ancient lake bottoms. On Georgian Bay, just off of Lake Huron, a team of scientists sets out to solve an 8,000-year-old mystery. Marine geologist Steve Blasko was one of the first to investigate the wreck of the Titanic.
We need to collect a couple of samples. That's about 8,500 years old.
Now he's probing into another catastrophe, also featuring icebergs.
Sort of a foot, but it's about 4 meters across, up to 15 feet.
His main focus is the effect of climate change on water levels here, between Georgian Bay and Lake Huron.
The history of the area starts with the retreat of the Laurentide ice sheet. And underneath the ice, we had areas where water was ponded, substantial amounts of water ponded as far back as Hudson Bay. And then during the glacial retreat, we had catastrophic meltwater outbursts. And in a matter of days, huge volumes of water moved through this area.
Jay, roll in when you're ready. Okay. Camera diver rolling in.
For Steve, these clear waters conceal two mysteries. One concerns a lost forest, which flourished during drier days, when the earliest humans, Paleo-Indians, may have moved through this area. Here, members of the Canadian Forces diving team help recover the remains of a drowned cedar located several years ago.
Outside of the stump. They're right on top of it now.
Now, thanks to new technology, Steve hopes to learn more about prevailing climates before trees like this were drowned.
I think they're coming to the surface.
I'm both Collins agents.
Go. On the surface. On the divers. Okay. Come over to the other side. All right, let me come. Good job. Okay.
Successful trip?
Very successful.
How was the filming?
Very good.
Very good.
You tell me, Steve, do you need another sample or can we cut that one in half?
No, that one can be cut in half. This is a piece of white cedar. We discovered it a couple of years ago and recovered a sample and had it radiocarbon dated. It dated at 8,522 years old, which was quite amazing for us because that's at a time when we felt lake levels here were at least 30 to 50 meters lower than present.
Okay, just get it light there on the other end there.
New analytical techniques to look at isotopes allow us to look at the cell structure in this piece of wood and actually determine what the temperature and humidity conditions were like at the time that the cedar was growing. And we're hoping that we can actually compare that data to what we're learning from other lines of evidence and from that reconstruct the climate. What was the climate like at 8,520 years ago? And we believe it's actually going to tell us that the climate was more arid, and drier, and that was the cause for the decline in the lake level.
We're going to wrap up right now for analysis.
What's interesting is we feel this occurred in a rather unique point in time when we were making the transition from deglaciation. The glaciers had melted, and we're getting into a much warmer interglacial climate. And we'd like to clearly understand that event, because what it'll do is tell us how sensitive lake levels are to climate change. Glad you know this trail, Lenore.
Yes. One of my favorite trails.
Lenora Kishig Tobias comes from a family of Anishinaabe storytellers.
I mean, imagine going back here 15,000 years ago and there's 2 to 3 kilometers of ice, glacial ice sitting above you.
Oh, yes.
And
the ice my people used to visit.
The ice your people visited.
Signposts to the past abound here, where native people consider cedars sacred, and where storytelling and oral history often go hand in hand.
Do you want to look way up there?
Oh, wow.
See that?
Yeah.
That cedar is incredible.
It's a huge root system. And it's stuck right into the roots are right into the bedrock.
Yeah, it's perched right there at the point of the rock.
Well, that's really interesting, because that's just like what we're seeing underwater.
Natural disasters can carve deep grooves in the collective memory and become the basis of stories passed from one generation to the next. One native Anishinaabe legend tells how an enormous flood created the islands of Georgian Bay. In the legend, a giant beaver was trapped and, in trying to escape, dug through its massive dam. As the dam burst, a raging flood gushed forth, and the retreating waters uncovered thousands of sparkling new islands.
Steve, I'd like to know what you thought the first time I told you the story about the giant beaver.
Oh, yes. I was quite surprised, actually. And when you said that you'd heard all this before, and I was there reporting on the results of our research from the previous year, and it kind of threw me, and I thought, gee, that's really, maybe one of our other scientists had been through here, and because I was reporting on new things, and then you said, well, you'd heard all this before. And then I remember asking, well, who told you? Where'd you learn? She said, my father, Donald Kishig. And I thought, I've never read one of his publications. And he said, no, he's an elder, and we have all these stories, and that just opened the door.
Steve's second mystery has also surfaced in stories. A channel, thought to have been the main water link between Lake Huron and Georgian Bay, lost as the glaciers burst their way through the Great Lakes. And this time, he's armed with the very latest technology. Scientists are using new technology to search for an ancient waterfall at the bottom of Lake Huron.
Over the last 10 years, we've developed a new technique to map the bottom of the lake. Historically, we did it all with what we would just call a single beam of sound that went to the bottom and gave us a single profile of the lake bed. Now we have a capacity to actually map the lake bed with, in this case, 127 beams all at the same time. And that's called multi-beam mapping technique. It actually allows us to create the equivalent of an air photograph of the lake bed.
All right, here's the lines that we ran yesterday, and here's the gridded image of the data from
Helped by this process, they've now found the lost water link, the Lucas Channel, and the light at the end of this channel, a legendary waterfall.
And we're coming right up to the waterfall, and then basically water raged through here and right over and down, very similar to Niagara Falls.
The ghostly image rears up, the drowned remains of part of the Niagara escarpment. Once it stood high on dry land, and over its crest flowed a waterfall, now living only in Anishinaabe legend as the place of thunder water. Lucas Falls vanished from sight as glaciers melted and the Earth's crust rebounded. Yet it was once higher than Niagara's Horseshoe Falls and thundered from Lake Huron into Georgian Bay. Guided by 3D images, team members arrive at the crest of the once spectacular Lucas Falls. One waterfall vanishes, another appears. That too will vanish relatively soon, but the Earth's relentless journey continues without missing a beat.
As geologists, we're dealing with time. That's our currency. And all the time we're trying to use our imagination and our detective work to reconstruct what the planet looked like in the ancient past. And you've got to remember that just a little more than 100 years ago, it was thought that the Earth was only 6,000 years old. So in the ensuing 100 years, we now know that the Earth is more than 4.5 billion years old. So it's a long book. We know when the book was started, and we're trying to fill in the chapters. Each landscape is built on the wreckage, if you like, of the previous one. And sometimes the page has been obliterated. Just think of the Grenville Mountains, for example. We know they were here because we see their roots. But the actual mountains have long gone. And it's the same with the glaciers. By looking at the deposits, the erratics, the origin of the Great Lakes, we know there were major ice sheets here in the last 2 million years. So we're looking for clues to reconstruct those environments, to fill in the pages.
When you finally understand how insignificant a moment in time is compared to 400 million years old or 1 billion years, you know, especially when we compare the human race to Mother Nature, because this is all Mother Nature here. This happened without any humans on the Earth. It tells us that our moment right now is like that. I can only hope that we could be around long enough to be a layer in some future rock. And they would say, oh, that was a human.